Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the test screening. My name is Chloe,
And my name is Billy.
and we are here. It's way too early in the morning. This is morning brain territory. Mistakes will be made, warning everybody in advance, so that we can get all of these great reviews in. We're going to start off with our suggestions this week because we got so many, you guys. We got so many. I was blown away by how many responses we had on TikTok and on Instagram. So I'm just going to read a few of them out, and Billy, you can kind of, just tell me if you agree that the score is banging. Because I asked for bangers only. If the score isn't a banger, you need to tell us straight away. We can knock it off the list.
It's an essential requirement.
So, some of the ones that we had was Cal from our uni course gave us City of God.
I think it's a banger. I think it's been a long time since I've seen City of Gods, but I seem to remember the very kind of aggressive and bustling and frenetic sort of rhythm of those favelas and that very crime-ridden, hectic lifestyle that the children live in the slums in Rio is reflected a lot in the very sort of fast-paced Brazilian music that's used in the score for that film, which I think from my memory reflects and sinks in very tightly with the super choppy and fast and balletic rhythm of the edit. So yes, I would say banger on that one.
Next one that he gave us was Atlanta.
Can always count on Carl for some left field picks. I love it.
I love Atlanta. No, I'm saying straight away, that's not even left field. Atlanta is just full of bangers.
I think the thing I love about Atlanta's music is just. I mean, obviously, it's about so many different things that show, and African American culture and the American dream. A lot of very pertinent social issues in America, but also hip hop culture and the new versus the older rap music and how the scene has changed, particularly Atlanta, which is such a hotbed for like the southern trap scene and everything like that. That those strands of that style of music, and I just love the way it contrasts the new with the old. In that show, there's a flashback episode where it goes back to their school days, and it immediately, I mean, the film stock and the sort of the grade is different on that episode, sort of reflect that change in time period, and they immediately place you in, I think it's the 80s and the 90s, and probably the early 90s, with "Passing Me By" the Far Side, which just has this instantly recognizable like lumbering drum beat and this really weird, ethereal kind of chirping synthesizer that's just so cool. And one of probably my favorite use of a recognized hip hop song in Atlanta is there's I think it's the last scene of the first season where I don't want to spoil it for anyone who's not seen Atlanta, but there's a implication throughout season one that Donald Glover's character Earn is, I mean, it's not quite an implication. It's quite clear he's struggling to earn money and financially sustain himself and his partner and their daughter and pay child support. But it's not revealed to us the full extent of how much he's struggling financially. And then there's a really great montage with sort of cutting with some other characters that kind of slowly reveals just sort of the sort of state of disrepair his life's gotten into. And it's soundtracked by Elevators by Outkast, which is a song that's kind of all about sort of hustling and finding your way through sort of difficult and tumultuous periods in both the music industry and sort of hood life. And it's got these really like airy, atmospheric synthesizers that kind of fade in and out to the beat. They almost sound like kind of escalators, and the lights and sound effects on the elevators as they're sort of like slipping past each other. It's like one of the most unique beats in a rap song I think I've ever heard. And it's like iconic and one of the most iconic Outkast songs. And yeah, it's just a great use of music in that episode.
Feel like you're not going to want to go into that much detail with this next one, and I find it really funny because this one was suggested to us by Guy, who he's a sound guy. His whole thing is like music and sound design. He recommended Cars.
Did he?
Yes.
I love I love that from Guy. That's such a good pick. I mean, you say that, I have to say, Life is a Highway by Rascal Flatts, absolute
Okay.
cornerstone of my childhood. I had that song on my first iPod Shuffle, just country rock slapper that so brilliantly. Who would have soundtracks the whole positive and celebratory and competitive vibe of that film? And who would have thought they could have got a country band like that to make a song for one of the one of the most C tier Pixar films? I mean, I do have a soft spot for Cars, but it's not one of the more popular ones. And the fact that they pulled in those artists for that song is kind of a miracle.
You say it, yes. Okay, I agree. Certified banger. We'll allow it. Some other suggestions were on the theme of Cars, Baby Driver, which I totally agree with. I think the soundtrack for that film is fantastic. We also had Iron Man. Iron Man, I'm not so sure of. That was a TikTok one. I find a lot of the Marvel films very samey, but are there some bangers in Iron Man? I actually can't remember.
There's a cool use of Back in Black by AC/DC at the start. It was actually the movie that introduced me to that song. And of course, there's a very cool, very badass kind of apt use of Iron Man by Black Sabbath. One of the best heavy metal songs ever written. Over the end credits, kind of it sort of kicks in the riff as he makes the announcement at the end of the film. Oh no, yeah, I am Iron Man, and then all the reporters scramble, and then the main riff comes in. It's like, okay, that's really cool. But apart from that, I don't think
Okay,
there's
okay.
a ton I remember
All
from that one.
right, all right. I'll give them that then. We also had Luna, one of my mates, gave us "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," which I've not seen. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah, it's one of the best Coen Brothers films. That soundtrack album won a Grammy for Album of the Year. So
Yeah.
that's how, yeah, it's just all this bluegrass and like kind of old folk and country music from like I think the 20s and 30s is the time period. And it's that not that I dislike that style of music at all, because I don't, but it's not one I particularly gravitate towards normally in my regular listening rotation. But it just fits the kind of the very quirky, dusty vibe of that film so well. And there's a bit where they record. I think they have to get money from somebody, so they do him a favor by recording an old bluegrass classic in their studio. And George Clooney is essentially singing bluegrass. I mean, I'm not sure if it's actually his vocals, but he's doing these really amped, sort of exaggerated lip syncing, obviously in his performance where the character's actually singing, and it's just really funny watching him go way, just like did all these Southern American just like bluegrass vocal mannerisms, and then the other two, John Turturro and the other actor, his name escapes me, but they sort of like come in from the side of the frame every now and then disappear and then come back in and just harmonize with him. It's a great soundtrack, and the fact they had such crossover and mainstream appeal is reflected in the fact that it did so well at the Grammys.
Well, thank you for that one, Luna. I feel like I'll have to have a watch of that now, and so I can fully appreciate the soundtrack. We also had 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is iconic, absolutely
Yeah,
iconic.
absolutely.
Donnie Darko we had as well. I've not okay, the bit of an admission. I've not seen Donnie Darko.
It's a trip. It's a
No, I feel like it came like it was popular, and I just wasn't that kind of child when it was popular. I was like, this is not going to appeal to me in the way that it might appeal to me now. It looks really edgy. Like it looks a bit like every frame that I've seen is a little bit like an early pop punk album. It's like if Fall Out Boy made a film. That's kind of what I imagine would happen. Do you know what I mean?
yeah. No, I know what you mean. I'd be interested to watch it again now because it is quite it has a somewhat kind of gothic tone to it, which I think is really cool in how they, wrap up a really dark and quite sinister like apocalyptically tinged sci-fi story in amongst a coming of age drama. And I'd be interested to see if that sort of early 2000s edge kind of holds up now. But I think from a soundtrack perspective, it's certainly worth mentioning. It has a really iconic use of there was a very sort of mellow and sort of quietly dramatic, like piano-driven cover of Mad World by Tears for Fears that a guy called Gary Jules did, and that version of Mad World plays over a sort of climactic montage in the film where Donnie Darko sort of lays bare the sort of the secrets and the various sort of motivations that have gone into sort of the time traveling, rabbit that stalks Donnie, and the various different characters and how their lives and the time travel aspects of the narrative kind of all link together. And it's this really like beautifully melancholic just take on sci-fi. One of the most powerful of the ilk that I can certainly think of. So for that, and you will have definitely heard that version of the song if you listen to it again. So and it's I think it's almost made that version of the song more iconic than the original Tears for Fears version. It's certainly the one I
think I have seen. I think I have heard it. I must have done because I can remember a version that isn't the Tears for Fears version, so I'm guessing it's that one because it must have just become so iconic or like synonymous with the film. Yeah, it's amazing how music can do that. Sometimes when we talk about Blues Brothers a little bit later, like we're going to go into some of these songs that were recorded by the Blues Brothers. They're not Blues Brothers originals, but they kind of did surpass a lot of the originals in popularity, which you could say was a shame. Or like what did that version do for the song? Did it make it more popular? But we'll go into that in a little bit. We also had, I love this film, this is one of my favourites, Juno. I was very close to suggesting that we do Juno. That's one of my absolute favourites. Elliot Page is... I went through an Elliot Page like moment when I just watched anything he was in. Like literally. And yeah, I've got very fond memories. And I would also add into that Perks of Being a Wallflower, who I think had the same director as the guy who wrote and directed Perks of Being a Wallflower, and the soundtrack in Perks of Being a Wallflower, I would also argue, is quite iconic. There's some real bangers in that one.
Yeah. That was the film that introduced me to David Bowie's Heroes. So I'll always...
Oh my god!
Yeah, and it's an amazing film as well, so I will always hold a soft spot in my heart for the Perks of Being a Wallflower. And there's that sort of great central plot device of there being like the mixtape and the songs they put on it, and then the tunnel song. And when you actually sit back and sort of analyze it from a plot perspective, you go, wait, how did these kids hear David Bowie on the radio and not realize it was him?
Yeah, no, I was thinking that. It's like they're like, "Who is this? What is this song?" And you're like, "Oh, like, dude, it's David Bowie. Like, this isn't the '80s."
Yeah, but then again, you say that. I think sometimes people take for granted the fact that David Bowie wasn't quite as rapturously successful in the States as I think he was in the UK. So I think I don't think it's as not credible as people sometimes say it is, that perhaps they wouldn't have necessarily known immediately what Heroes was. Maybe that they would have... I think the bit I find slightly less credible is how difficult they have finding the song afterwards, but it's such it so wonderfully punctuates that emotional moment they have in driving in the tunnel together that I can kind of forgive it.
Pre-Spotify days.
Pre-Spotify days. Pre-Shazam days. Pre-Shazam days.
We also had Pirates of the Caribbean, which, oh yeah, hell yeah, like that. I mean, I'm not a massive Pirates of the Caribbean fan of the film, but no one can deny the soundtrack, the score, banger.
The swashbuckling theme, I mean, just instantly recognisable.
Into the Spider-Verse, we also had, which that's like, I'd say that some of the music in that soundtrack is like a really good example of stuff that's going to become like modern classic. A lot of them got in my head. It's a good album. The Into the Spider-Verse album, like it's got lots of like Post Malone and some really good hip hop rap artists on there. It's worth a look. If you haven't listened to the Spider-Verse soundtrack, I would recommend it.
Start a Riot by Duckworth is like a grimy trap banger, right? I love that it actually made it into an animated cel-shaded Spider-Man film, especially with like another one like Sunflower on it.
Oh yeah, Sunflower's a tune. Sunflower is a tune. The last one, we also had a recommendation from My Little Pony, which I'm not even going to let you reply. Banger. It is banger, and I can't take that away from anybody. You know,
You're not going to let me usurp
no,
that
I'm not going to let you
that
ruin
pick.
this person. You know, if My Little Pony, you know what? Like we don't give it enough credit. And to the people who work on those films, you know, especially recently, I feel like they do put a lot of effort into the like music. So hey, if that's your thing, you go do you. Love My Little Pony. Well, I don't
I
love
need
My Little Pony, but
I
you
need to
know,
go and actually like dig out the soundtrack now and see if I'm missing a trick here.
you might be. I feel like you're gonna like message me later and be like, Chloe, what the hell were you on about? I said My Little Pony.
What are you doing to my ears?
But thank you everyone for all of those suggestions. I'm going to talk a little bit about. So there were a couple that we kind of singled out, or ones that we wanted to talk about. One of those was Charlie recommended The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and essentially we have realised that we do not have time this week to do all of them. So we're gonna basically pace this round. We're gonna pace this round of suggestions so that we can do Secret Life of Walter Mitty next week. So that is coming, Charlie, because I really want to see it. It's been on my list for a long time. But the ones that we're going to focus on today are The King and Blues Brothers. So we'll start with The King. Who was this recommended to you by? And yeah, tell us about it. Tell us what the score does for the film.
So this was recommended to me by my cousin Matt. Thank you, Matt, very much for the suggestion. You also made a great suggestion on the underrated films call out, which I'm sure we'll do at some point. But and also actually a friend, a colleague of mine at work, Lance, he mentioned The King to me and how he thought it was quite an underrated epic war film, and that he thought the score was particularly um, impactful, and how he'd looked at some of the music for inspiration when he was trying to pick out pieces of music for a pre-edit for the wildlife documentary we're working on at the moment. And so it's a 2019 epic historical war film. It's based on several plays from William Shakespeare's Henriade, and it includes an ensemble cast kind of led by Timothy Chalamet. He plays the Prince of Wales and later King Henry V of England, alongside Lily Rose Depp, Thomasin McKenzie, Sean Harris, Joel Edgerton, Robert Pattinson, and Ben Mendelsohn. Robert Pattinson is instantly delivering one of the strangest French accents I've ever heard on screen in cinema history. But I thought it was a really good film and quite underrated. What I liked about it was, particularly with notes to the score as well, is that for what I've just described as an epic war film, it's very kind of dialogue driven, and that's not to say there isn't intense, epic, very visceral and scrungy battle sequences in it, but the film does a lot to drill into the sort of emotional ramifications of combat in the medieval time period, and sort of demystifying sort of the allure of battle, and how there are tremendously weighty decisions that go into those sort of political and militaristic maneuvers that have a tremendous effect and ramifications on the lives of regular people and entire communities, of course, that he's taking the soldiers from into battle. And the score's composed by Nicholas Britell, who is an absolute god of modern cinematic scores. He composed the music for Succession, which has an incredible main theme, and also the music for Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk, which are just stunning and poetic and very emotive too. I was kind of surprised when I watched The King, because the score in it wasn't particularly prominent. It wasn't like super pounding in the mix or anything. But what I really thought it brought to it was this really strong sense of sort of aching, deep melancholy that comes with Timothy Chalamet's Henry V's decisions that do lose a lot of lives, and there's sort of moments where you get these kind of deeply rumbling or sort of kind of weeping string sections that punctuate moments where he sort of sees the devastation that sometimes his his poor decisions, or even just a necessary battle, sort of wreaked havoc on his army and several people's lives. And given that themes and orchestral scores in historical epics can be pushed so far to the forefront of the mix in terms of like driving the grandiosity of the story. What I really appreciated about this was how kind of restrained it was, and how it really didn't do too much. It did exactly what was required, and then sort of either dipped out in the mix or just didn't, wasn't super loud. So I appreciate the restraint it had in it, and also how it punctuated those emotional points too, and sort of very subtly sort of built in that melancholic mood that it sort of takes to medieval historical war. Should give special mention to a moment where the army initially land in France, and it's punctuated. There's kind of these very cool, deep blues as they sort of land on the stone beach, and it's soundtracked by these sort of choral, very kind of haunting choral vocals, which is interesting to kind of hear in a score for a film like this as well. But it kind of again puts that eerie and point across in a very humanistic way, because we're hearing voice used as instrument here. The melancholy of the moment is being conveyed through the voices of people that almost kind of sound ethereal and unearthly, as though they're coming from sort of maybe the afterlife or something like that. So it's kind of like clues you into the sort of the death and the loss and weariness that will come later. Yeah, I thought the music was really effective in this.
Yeah, I have heard all about Robert Pattinson's French accent in great detail by many people. So does that count as part of the score, do you think? Just the general ambiance of whatever Robert Pattinson was doing.
I guess you could say there is a certain musicality to the utter travesty he brings to speaking English in a French accent. And there's a great line where he says, where Timothy Chalamet, Henry, starts trying to talk to him, like a battle negotiation in French, and then I'm not going to try and imitate the accent because I'll just butcher it.
No,
Although maybe
please
that would be
do.
quite funny.
Please.
No, I'm not going to try. He goes, no, let's speak in English, and he says it very mockingly. He's like, because it's so ugly. And I'm just like, you've said speaking in English is ugly when that monstrosity is spewing forth from your mouth. So no, that is quite amusing. It does add a certain nails on a chalkboard characteristic to the soundtrack. I guess you could say.
Glorious. Moving on then, so this is our second suggestion that we're going to go into, and I'm really excited to talk about this. So this was recommended by my friend Evelyn. It was Blues Brothers. I've never seen Blues Brothers. This is my first time watching it, and holy moly, what the hell did I just witness? I was expecting it to be like a bit strange. I wasn't expecting it to be that strange. It is a lot. It's glorious as much as it is mad. It's just mad. And I can't be mad at it because it is actually very entertaining. So Blues Brothers is about two brothers, as you might have guessed. They come from is it like an orphanage or a school? But they're essentially, after one of them gets out of jail, they go back to this orphanage that's run by a nun who they call the Penguin, which just instantly funny. And they discover that the orphanage is low on funds, so in order to help them get the money back, they are going to put the band back together and try and raise the money honestly. So in order to get the band back together, they basically go on a bit of a road trip around Chicago, of which there are so many high-profile cameos of, soul and blues singers. They're like Aretha Franklin in this movie.
Yeah, how did they get Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, and James Brown, and
Don't know. How
and
did they pull
and
it
other
off?
people in the same film. It's crazy.
I'm like, well, how did I not know that so many of these guys were in this film? But essentially, it's a musical caper of which Carrie Fisher was Dan Aykroyd's girlfriend at the time. Um, Also plays like some like homicidal rocket launcher pairing like assassin. It's nuts, so nuts. Um, yeah, but there's musical sequences. It's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. Both Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, they were SNL alums at the time. Did you know that this film? I was looking this up afterwards because I couldn't believe the amount of destruction that this film kind of imposes upon all of its set pieces and everything. Like literally everything blows up at some point, or gets destroyed. And apparently, this film went 10 million over budget.
that that does not surprise me at all, but that's still obscene.
And I think apparently most of it went on cocaine, which I can fully believe.
That's you have to be hooked up on cocaine during some of those mall destruction scenes, some of those car chases, and also
Oh my
fueling John
god.
Belushi's habit.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the sad thing about it, I guess. But like, my god, is a coke fueled absolute fever dream. But I had a really good time with it. I really enjoyed it. A lot of the music is fantastic. It's mostly covers of really well known blues, R&B, a bit of pop classics by some of them by some of the artists that are scattered throughout the film. The Blues Brothers in themselves kind of became they released albums of this stuff and they became really really popular, which is a little bit strange. So I mean, again, I was looking into this because there was something about it that didn't quite sit right with me. With the kind of racial inequalities in the film. I kind of had a little look into it. And it's so strange how times have changed. Because when Blues Brothers was originally ready for release, executives said that it wouldn't play in white neighborhoods. Basically, some of them refused to even put it in cinemas in white neighborhoods because they said it was a black film and only black people would want to see a film where they have so many old black stars. It's insane to me. Like Aretha is in this film, and they were like, "Oh no, like not people aren't going to want to watch it." And by today's standards, I think that narrative has flipped because at the end of the day, it's essentially about two white guys who feel like they're going to go and save blues, and the black characters are kind of relegated to side characters within their own musical culture. It hasn't quite aged well in that sense. But then I was also thinking about it and I'm like, we're still kind of doing this with a lot like the kind of appropriation of the history of black music or traditionally music from black communities. La La Land. I mean, I'm not a massive La La Land fan, but you have say Ryan Gosling, who's going to be the savior of jazz, and you're like, please, could we not? And also we had Whiplash as well, which is there's not I don't think there is a black character in Whiplash.
No.
The diversity in these discussions has kind of become a bit skewed, and I'm not saying that like obviously people from any background can enjoy any kind of music. That's not what I'm trying to say. I just think it becomes quite blatant appropriation when you have the two main characters who are being hailed as the best of or the saviors of, and although they are paying tribute to a lot of the people that they're covering, unfortunately they kind of ended up taking over some of their music sales as well. Like when they released the album afterwards, sometimes the Blues Brothers version gained more popularity than the original artists themselves. So I love the film. I do love the film. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think there is something to be said for the way that at least you do have that representation there. Like you do have these massive names in soul and soul and jazz music in the film. At least they are present. I think if it was going to be made today, you'd want them to take on a more starring role and not just be cameos along the way. You get what I mean? I'd want them to be part of the story and part of the reason behind these characters having such a love for this music, and you'd want them to kind of take more of a starring role within the film. At least they're there, which is something that can't be said for a lot of films that kind of are about this subject. More recent films that are about this subject, have less representation than this. So, credit where credit's due. Could be better.
Favorite musical moment from it? Favorite song? Favorite performance sequence?
Which scene is fucking good?
Church scene is wild. James Brown just screaming at the old landmark while people are just somersaulting 50 feet in the air. I'm just like, who did this? Who came up with this?
Honestly,
Who came up with this as a genius?
It also, I mean, I love Aretha Franklin, and I think her moment I actually really enjoyed as well. When she's kind of like telling her husband not to just, up and leave her for these two random men that have walked into her diner. I do just think that the attitude and the fact that she's like dancing, like she's being so annoyed, but like dancing so daintily. There's something just really funny about that. I feel like a lot of them were in on the joke, which makes it so good to watch. You can see like the sparkle in the eyes of pretty much every character that turns up in this, where they're kind of like, this is mental, but I'm all here for it. But you, have you got a favourite?
Oh, I love
moment?
I love the opening credits where you just get those horn sections sort of bust in at the start of She Caught the Katie, and how they sort of cut between their two faces, and then he just transitions that really like smooth low down bluesy groove as they're like driving across the city to go back to the orphanage. I just it's such a great kickoff to the film. It's like perfect opening credits music.
It is good. That opening scene, it is pretty iconic. I would say when he like had the used condom in the.
Oh yeah,
I was like, ew, what kind of film is this gonna be? Luckily, it didn't continue on in that vein, but I was like, why the fuck is that? Absolutely grim. Anyway, we've got to move on. Otherwise, we're going to end up talking about Blues Brothers for the whole episode. But thank you, Evelyn, for suggesting that. I had a great time watching it, and I'm going to enjoy listening to a lot of the music. So, I'm going to talk about Dead Ringers, and this isn't the original Dead Ringers. This is a TV show adaptation of the original film starring Rachel Weisz. We spoke about it a few episodes ago, I believe, when it was first coming out. So if you like binged this like rapidly, how was it? How did you do?
So, one of the things when you kind of naturally wonder when the announcement of a reimagining of a very kind of celebrated source material that originated as a film comes out is, will it kind of justify its existence and manage to differentiate itself in terms of its narrative slant, overall filmmaking feel? Will it bring sort of breathe new life into the material? And that would be especially tough when you're working in the shadow of a director that's as revered and with as distinct a style of like atmospheric cruelty as David Cronenberg. And I was very intrigued to see what new approach could be brought to this uniquely disquieting story. I think we spoke about that and how I thought, there was definitely new territory to be mined from this story. And after having seen the series in its entirety, I have to say that I'm somewhat torn on the final project, though I do think there's much to appreciate here. So for anyone who doesn't know, Dead Ringers was a 1988 film from David Cronenberg, The twins were played by Jeremy Irons, and here they're played by, as you say, Rachel Weisz. Two twin gynecologists, the Mantle twins, one named Beverly and one named Elliot. They are geniuses in their field. They are sort of trailblazers in the world of, well, in the new version of female medicine and gynecology. And they're looking to kind of expand their reach and sort of just advance developments in the world of, appropriate healthcare and medical care for women. Whereas it's a lot more about toxic masculinity and playing God in the original film. And even though they are geniuses, they have a very twisted and toxic codependent relationship. Elliot is a lot more outwardly volatile and brash, and Beverly is a lot more kind of insecure and, insular and somewhat isolated. And because they're basically identical, they have this very strange thing they do where they sort of swap in each other in and out of both their jobs and their love lives, both as a way of, helping the one who's not particularly adept at forming relationships, achieve romantic and sexual pleasure, and also combat fatigue when they're doing their work. And it kind of leads to some very twisted scenarios. And given the recent developments with the crisis really with female medical care in the States, I was kind of very interested to see how this was going to put a new slant on the material. So to start with the good, in terms of its style, this new version of Dead Ringers, it feels vastly different from the original film. The original has this very kind of unnerving sterility, this icy sort of removed inertia, and this really quietly and uncomfortably twisted masculinity. This new version is sharper, it's more direct, it's also kind of a lot more zooms in on the characters, it's more intimate, it's visceral in how it pushes in on the sisters' dark attacks on each other and more outwardly toxic markers of their relationship. And this is also greatly aided by a firecracker dual performance from Rachel Weisz that does a lot to make a far greater distinction between the sisters' personalities. I mean, all great respect to the amazing Jeremy Irons and his performance in the original, but in that film it does kind of, you feel as though they do bleed into each other somewhat, and there's a struggle to sometimes differentiate between them, which is part of the point to an extent. But I feel like this new version of Dead Ringers greatly benefits from there being much more pronounced differences in the sisters. Also, like I said, the base level idea of taking the story and updating it to modern times and switching the gender of the siblings to female is frankly genius, considering the situation we're in currently with reproductive rights. The original film puts a lot more theme on the idea of gynecology as this really sort of twisted way of sort of exuding perverse control on the female anatomy. They come up with these really twisted gynecological tools, and here we see more. We see two trailblazing female medical professionals in this kind of self-destructing crisis between greatly expanding the safe healthcare for women, but financial heavyweights and investors, offering and beckoning money, and then the desire to commodify that industry and use the sisters' influence and medical proficiency to aid this, and the way that then bleeds into the sisters' relationship and conflict with Elliot's brazen sexuality and power hungry attitudes, and driving a lot of this financial steering, with Beverly's more earnest desires for improving medical care for women and her maternal feelings. That sort of different dynamic here is fascinating. I find Beverly as well a lot more empathetic in this version of the film, which I really appreciated. But in the end, there are a few reasons why this doesn't quite fully work for me. The series tries to retain some narrative aspects of the original film story that, rather than fully committing to the more pertinent zeitgeisty social points that I just mentioned, that make this version feel so fresh and exciting. And for me, this in turn leads to a certain amount of thematic entanglement. For me, it kind of does a disservice to the series' overall cohesion in terms of narrative flow and structure. This poisonous codependency, it's an important part of the original story, and it is interesting, but I'm not sure the series puts a spin on it which is that distinct from the original film at all, really. And I would have much rather the series delve even greater into these social themes rather than retread, admittedly, very well acted water. And in its current state, it moves between these thematic halves with, I think, rigidity and this erratic kind of lack of direction. There are these um, dinner parties and pitches for finance that feel as though they're happening in episodic vacuums rather than a holistic miniseries. The best miniseries I think feel like 6 to 8 hour movies. This doesn't feel like that. It feels very kind of tenuously kind of pulled together. It doesn't have the easiest flow, and that can kind of make it a sort of difficult and just kind of a strangely strenuous viewing experience at times. The fourth episode is also total filler, and I think it squanders an opportunity to delve into how the Mansells' relationship with their parents has shaped them into the people they are. A later introduction of a writer character building an expose on the twins, it also, smacks of a cheap ploy, I think, to extend the film's material towards full series lengths, which is 6-hour-long episodes. The other quite nagging issue I have is how the character of Elliot is written. I really appreciate that there's this far more pronounced separation in personality and performance between the twins. However, Elliot's written as so brash and bullish and crass to the point of, I think, irritating caricature, which I think at many points it greatly undermines the authenticity of that central relationship. It's a shame too, because the performance of Beverly is quite beautifully judged in its distant and isolated quirk and gentle sadness and yet soft empathy. But the other performance just rings so sour and creates this fictitious dissonance that makes it difficult early on to invest fully in the pair's dynamic. However, the final episode has this really square focus on one of the twins and these gripping hard right turns into surrealism that do, in the end, I think, a stellar job of tying together the themes of abuse and codependency to the point where it may make the prior friction between the twins go over better on a rewatch and recontextualize it to a certain degree, especially with like the psychological journey of Beverly in particular. And so I would be open to maybe a revisit, shedding new light on the material. But my initial thoughts on it post viewing is that I'm not entirely quite on board with it.
Would be your rating for Dead Ringers?
My rating. I think I'm going to go straight down the middle on this one. I think a C+. I think I'm just too torn on the various different aspects of it at this stage.
Honest, it does sound like quite heavy material to binge.
Yes, it was. I did feel suitably weathered after having sat through 6 hours of this.
Oh my God, your effort is appreciated, and I hope you have time to mentally recover for next week. Moving on from Dead Ringers, we've got an anime pick next. We haven't done an anime so far. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on this one. So this is Suzume, who was directed by the same director who did Weathering with You and Your Name, so a big name in the animation world. Your thoughts?
So I was very excited for this, considering that the director Makoto Shinkai, his previous films, he's made lots of shorts and features, but The Garden of Words and in particular Your Name, signaled to me that he was one of the most exciting voices working today in modern Japanese anime. His films take this kind of equally grand and fantastical scenarios, and bending the laws of time and space and physics, and fuse them into very real existential human issues. And this genre blending was like rip-roaringly compelling and incredibly emotive, and sending both these films, Garden of Words and particularly Your Name, into the realms of like modern animated classics, runaway success in Japan, and so much crossover success in critical acclaim in the States and the UK and everything. And I think I would go as far to say Your Name is one of my at least favorite animated films of the modern era, if not ever. Not even just in Japanese anime. It is just a total total masterpiece. I think I would go as far to say, in my opinion, I would, I can't say enough nice things about Your Name. And with his subsequent film, Weathering with You, while solid, it did feel like a retread of that previous feature. And on the topic of Suzume, I sadly do think this slight downward trend is continuing in Shinkai's filmography. The story is it centers on a young girl named Suzume who, in a sort of remote Japanese sort of island sort of village, encounters a strange door that sort of spews forth this very sort of dark, sort of gargantuan, demonic force that triggers an earthquake. And she encounters this very kind of strange, sort of gothic, almost kind of Heathcliff-esque young man who is trying to shut this door. And through sort of a strange sort of turn of magical events, he becomes, by this other sort of mystical cat who appears to have a connection to these fantastical events. He turns the cat turns the guy into a chair, and that, while seems random, does actually relate to the lore of the story. And Suzume and the young man, after he's turned into a chair, they go on sort of this city hopping road trip-esque adventure to travel to these various doors and close them. No one else can see these doors as they appear, and sort of save various different parts of Japan from disaster at the hands of these sort of seismic earthquakes. Now, the central conceit of having doors that act as portals through which a force, clearly acting as a metaphor for generational grief, that is baked into the fabric of Japan, is very intriguing. But despite the script provides a very solid kind of narratively justified stage for this city hopping adventure with these episodic interactions with a revolving cast of characters as they go between the cities and try and find the doors that pop up over Japan. And there is cute, warm character drama interspersed with some sparkling and very kinetically staged action sequences. There's one particularly impressive sequence involving graceful movement between the tracks of a decommissioned roller coaster, where kind of a door has popped up. But for me, the central problem with Suzume is that a lot of the side characters and sort of humanistic detours, they feel like incidental asides that don't contribute much to the overall plot development. I found myself frequently hoping to revert attention back to these more mystical metaphors and moving towards their human significance. But instead, the pacing repeatedly stagnates in favour of these dialogues that feel like distractions, sadly. There's a particularly egregious road trip driving section towards the back end of the film where I really start to feel like Suzume was elongating the runtime to an unnecessary degree. And it's not particularly long either. I don't even think it cracks an hour and 45 minutes, but even then it did feel like this was, a much smaller, the magical stuff was a much smaller, maybe shorter 30 to 45 minute feature, more in the vein of the Garden of Words, whereas they were using all this humanistic kind of humorous stuff, which is kind of nicely written, but doesn't really gel with the magical elements of the story, which is something Shinkai is usually a total master at. And as for the fantasy, when Suzume did eventually focus back in on it, it was steeped in this obscure lore, and the rules of which are quite obtusely laid out. I think it keeps the audience in the dark for so long that by the time we get round to the final moments, it kind of like throws a lot of reveals at you at the last minute, and it sort of like gives you sort of narrative whiplash, really, and that made for a somewhat unsatisfying and not particularly seamless conclusion to the story. And it made it hard to make sense of and invest in some of the magical elements. And the fact that the rules are laid out quite obtusely, it provides another layer of sort of screenplay obstacle to getting to the human meaning underneath the otherworldly events. So, although I have seen online some comments saying that a Western audience wouldn't necessarily understand how Suzume is very kind of closely linked to some trauma that has resulted from some recent earthquakes in Japan. So with that in mind, maybe if I researched more into that and looked back at the film with sort of more of a holistic view, given that I know the sort of the eventual outcome of the story, I would kind of maybe see some more thematic depth in it. But as it stands, it didn't really leave me satisfied, and I did have some sort of screenplay centric issues with it. Not to mention like, the main character is kind of grating. Like she is a little bit annoying, which is a shame to say. It doesn't give me any pleasure to say that, but I think Suzume is probably my least favorite of his three main features so far. I would give this a C plus. I was sadly disappointed by this one.
Did you see the dubbed version, or did you see the subtitled version? Because I find that greatly impacts how much I enjoy an anime, or how much it grates on me.
Subtitled, I saw.
Okay, at least you watched it the right way.
Yes,
I find a lot of like the American voices really get to me. I don't know why. The only dub that I can watch and enjoy, probably because it's the one that I like. It's the way that I experienced the show first. Was Full Metal Alchemist. The English dub for Full Metal Alchemist, I'd say, is pretty decent, but a lot of them just don't cut it. They're so bad.
there's some pretty good Ghibli dubs, but I think in amongst that we also have Grave of the Fireflies, which is probably the worst dub in any anime I've ever
I've not
watched.
seen it, the dubbed version of Grave of the Fire. I mean, it made me cry like a baby. Grave of the Fireflies. I was too young to watch that. I don't think. I think I saw the animation and I was like, oh, it's an animated film, and then oh my god,
The young boy's voice acting is appalling in it. It's just like,
oh dear.
why are we delivering
I
these
mean,
really, really heart-wrenching lines with, more wood than a piece of IKEA furniture?
odd. I mean, there's I've got a bit of a soft spot for the Howl's Moving Castle English dub again because it's how I experienced it first.
That's
I
good.
will
That's
say
good.
Christian
Billy,
Bale as
Billy Crystal.
Howl. Yeah, Billy Crystal. I mean, Christian Bale as Howl is not my favorite.
Yeah, I think when I do eventually rewatch Howl's Moving Castle, I think that I'm maybe going to come up against a bit of friction there, and I'm going to go, "Ooh."
I'd watch the Japanese. Watch the Japanese version. It's good. Um, hey, so now we're moving on to How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which I believe is a documentary.
No, it's actually it's based on a non-fiction novel, but it is actually a environmentally charged thriller, and also very
Intriguing.
very interestingly, I've heard this term banded around about it, and it's fascinating. It's one of the only films I can think of, aside from maybe Four Lions, that you could credibly label as a terrorist procedural, which I think is
Oh, God.
which sounds very dark, but I think is a great way of describing it. So, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. I mean, the premise is very direct and straightforward. Really, it's essentially a number of different environmental activists from several different areas of the United States, sort of all coalesce and coordinate this operation in the Texas wilderness in order to blow up, as you could probably guess, two pipelines to disrupt oil flow and sort of wreak havoc with this faceless corporation due to the sort of the ongoing climate crisis and their own various sort of demons and motivations relating to the corporation and how it's affected their lives. And it's treading this very fine line between, is this terrorism, or to what degree is it terrorism, or even if it is class terrorism and sabotage, is it fair game due to the incredibly high stakes that are involved in the state of the climate crisis currently. And one of the great things about How to Blow Up a Pipeline, aside from that amazing title, is to see a director pull and display such a wide array of really great and complementary stylistic touchstones and influences, whilst helping them to coalesce into his own distinctive voice and cinematic statement. And I read an interview with the director, Daniel Goldhaber, and he listed a lot of his 15 or so key influences for the film, and they're fantastic. The man has elite taste, and you can see so many of the influences on screen. The urgent social commentary and like guerrilla-inspired, infused, warfare and danger of the Battle of Algiers. This melancholy and ominous sense of impending doom from Gus Van Sant's Columbine shooting-focused drama Elephant. The barren and rugged atmosphere of Catherine Bigelow's The Hurt Locker. The film opens with this really propulsive, electric, and driving montage that connects the various different members as part of the collective unit and their ironclad and tightly knit coordination that kind of very satisfyingly and gratifyingly pulls upon the shadowy, murky rebel causes and heist film intensity of Jean-Pierre Melville's Army of Shadows and Le Cercle Rouge. And that same heist movie inflected panic and peril that you would get from something like Le Cercle Rouge travels over to like these nail-biting bomb-making and planting sequences, which lengthen shots in the edit to squeeze the tension, dry until we're sort of at the white knuckled at the very edge of our seat, but then quickly punch in with several close inserts to raise our pulse again. They're as intense as any sort of bomb defusal scene from The Hurt Locker or Four Lions. And the very physical nature of these planting sequences, it makes the outcome of them feel very physically earned by the characters, making them even more satisfying. But because it signals us into the heightened risk for human error in these moments, which make it that much more sort of relieving when things go right, or very shocking and intense when things don't necessarily go right. Has Blow Up a Pipeline, it also plays it very smartly invokes the conventions of the posse film or the crewing up process that comes as standard in a one last job style of crime or heist thriller, or even the terrorism-focused black comedy of something like Four Lions. Ocean's 11 and Reservoir Dogs were listed as key influences, and you can certainly see that on screen. But the film takes this kind of slightly audacious approach to its narrative structure in how it cuts in and out of its various terrorism-focused schemes with character-centric flashbacks, and these detail how the crew found each other and assembled alongside each character's individual motivations for wanting to be part of this operation, and how they each embody a key component of this team: bomb maker, navigator, vandal, trespasser, and coordinator, and also like spearhead, sort of like leader of the team. And putting this well-worn cinematic context into a very real and potently sort of aggressive extremist scenario was incredibly entertaining, and also sort of adds moral complexity to the proceedings and makes it prescient of issues that are going on currently in the world with the battle around climate change. The film is grappling with some very complex issues here, like to what extent are these characters terrorists and their actions terrorism, and if it's justifiable. The film, I think, smartly lays out these ideas in the characters' dialogue as they grapple with the implications of what they're doing, which makes their interplay compelling. But it's not so, polemical or, overall or heavy-handed in its political messaging that it sounds like the screenwriter's speechifying on the topic at hand through the characters, which is often a complaint I have with these types of films. But How to Blow Up a Pipeline kind of wisely sidesteps that. We are interested in the conflicted views of these characters, but the film as a whole, it takes this kind of non-judgmental, neutral approach in its direction and sort of framing of the events, which renders it difficult to pull any easy answers out of the issues here. And I think that thematic contrast between, the struggle the characters are doing and the film's overall framing of events is very intelligent and very sophisticated, and I appreciate it very much, even if the character development or unpacking of their past isn't the most extensive. The bustling handheld camera work and like jabbing synth score as well, direct, grand, and like action inflected take on what the score of The Social Network would have been like if it had been written for a procedural thriller or a heist film. And I think it elevates the tension and forward momentum of the story significantly. I thought this was terrific, and I thought it had some interesting things to say socially, and was just a really tense, nail-biting, and gripping thriller as well. That's has the 70s and 80s sort of crime drama aesthetic and style that really sort of elevates the material. I give this an A-. I would definitely recommend this.
And A+ for good name.
Yes, A+ for the title too.
It's a great title. So our final film this week is called One Fine Morning, and I don't know anything about this. I can't even remember you talking about it last week. Did you talk about it last week? Was this on the thing?
I did mention this was coming out, although it hasn't been super on my radar. I think if it didn't have Lea Seydoux in it, I might not have even really known about it at all.
Leah, so do you like it? Uh, I'll leave. I'll go.
Oh, you,
Goodbye.
you, you,
Uh,
you never. I'll see you out. The door is over there. No, you never fail to make me laugh with your fabulous puns. I love them. Um,
welcome. Okay,
so,
I'm gonna leave you alone now to actually review the film.
so this is a Mubi distributed drama, French drama. It's currently out in cinemas, and I think it will also. I think it came out on the 14th in cinemas, and I think it's now going to be on Mubi, either from the 28th or maybe in the coming months it will come onto Mubi. Centers around a not quite middle age, probably around her early 30s, a woman named Sandra who is essentially like kind of she feels as though she's kind of gone weary and dejected with romance. She feels as though her love life may be dwindling and there's nothing really left for her there. And she's also going through a very sort of tumultuous period in her family with her having to put her father in a home due to his sort of growing dementia and inability to sort of live on his own and sort of cope with taking care of himself now, and some of the family friction in sort of proving very very difficult and very straining. And she also begins a relationship with a friend of her, but very close friend of hers who is in fact married, and it's kind of like this push pull between feeling she is deserving of love and wanting to start again, but also sort of in starting that with the person she feels is right for her, but also that sort of coming under very sort of difficult circumstances, and can they make that work? So kind of well-worn dramatic territory for a family drama. And one fine morning, it continues director Mia Hansen-Love's preoccupation with characters and families navigating tumultuous existences, life-changing events and struggles, and it's one of those films where the full significance and power of it kind of gradually creeps up on you and suddenly blossoms to reveal the complete emotional and thematic picture right at the very end, which is a bit of a gamble, but I think can really work, and I think it certainly works here. How delicately intelligent the writing is, it becomes quite apparent early on simply with the choice of profession for the character of Sandra. She's a freelance translator, and Lea Seydoux' subtle tightness and repression in the slight stiffness of her movements and vocal delivery and vocal cadence. It conveys sort of the character's predisposition to suppress her emotions and move to her natural response, human and professional, which is to speak for other people. Her stock in trade is to take on the feelings of other people and relay their words rather than her own. And elsewhere, her distress and kind of slender moments of joy, they bloom forth in small gestures, and they never feel anything less than pitched at just the right level of overtness. And this point on Seydoux' performance is also reflective of the film's, I think, general approach to its familial struggles, which is to say there isn't a single trace of artifice, mawkishness, or sap anywhere to be found here. It's one of the most honest depictions of a family struggle I can remember seeing in quite a while, actually. It completely sidesteps any form of melodrama. Mia Hansen's presentation of the friction between these characters is completely sincere. It's particularly impressive as well when you consider that material like this has been used to mine, melodrama in the past, very well, in fact, and in foreign cinema, perhaps most notably by Spain's Pedro Almodovar. When you kind of look at this and say a Pedro Almodovar film, which admittedly is from a different country and completely different style, but when you look at how much he mines, very sort of big, heavy theatrical emotions from sort of similar narrative territory, and then you look at how beautifully understated One Fine Morning is, it's really quite impressive on Mia Hansen-Love's part.
King of Almodovar, just to quickly sidetrack for a second, have you seen the trailer for his new western starring Pedro Pascal? Because I am here for it. It looks so camp.
I've seen it. I've seen it crop up on social media with Pedro Pascal. And I think it's Ethan Hawke as well.
Ethan Hawke.
And I'm so excited. I need to watch the full trailer, but I'm always excited for a new Almodovar film, and to have these two in that sort of script just sounds like a match made in heaven. I'm hoping it works, and the fact that it's going to be a western as well, because Almodovar.
It's like I think it's his answer to Brokeback Mountain, which makes me very excited because I'm
I'm
an
not,
Almodovar fan. I love Volvo. Volvo's one of my favorites, and he's done some great films.
yeah, talk to her all about my mother. Bad Education is very underrated as well. Julieta,
I'm
Pain and
on the
Glory.
verge of a nervous breakdown.
Oh yes, his sort of big sort of mainstream breakthrough, and he's got such a reverence for film history and deconstructs the genre so well that I would be fascinated to see what he brings to a western. But yes, back to One Fine Morning.
Sidetrack.
No, it's a very 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 good, very apt sidetrack. But One Fine Morning, it finds beauty in small triumphs for its characters, in despair filled patches. It finds beauty in softly focused, glowing cinematography, in hopeful resolutions that feel so incredibly natural and in the moment and earned too. The film. It's a far cry from films that feel as though they give their characters wins as palate cleansers at the end of the story after pummeling them emotionally for large sections of the film. Um, the, the wins in One Fine Morning, they feel like such natural progressions of what the characters have been through up until that point, which I really appreciated. Ultimately, One Fine Morning is a quite beautiful exploration of turmoil, loss, and grief as, I think, necessity for positive growth and rebirth. You get this sense of cycles in life. But the film is kind of free flowing in its structure. It doesn't call massive attention to that, which again I appreciated. The film also says that despite pain of the present moment, that should be savoured for how it brings the past and the future together and allows us to move into the future. It could be argued that the film's restraint means it can't quite reach into like firework inducing like dramatic territory, but I don't hold that against it, as it achieves its goal with real honesty and beauty and such kind of such real and generous sort of honesty with its characters, and it does feel like you're just looking in on a window into a real family's life. And I really like this. I give this a B plus, and maybe on some more, maybe with more time, it would even grow on me even more. It's a very fine piece of work. I would, if it's done in cinemas and also on Mubi soon, I would recommend people seek this out.
Fantastic. So a surprise edition to that tier of film. I didn't think that it would quite rank that highly, considering that I've not heard much about it. But it's sometimes it's nice when a film surprises you in that way. That's our final review this week. What have we got coming up next week? Apart from obviously we've got Walter Mitty as our audience suggestion, carrying on the music and scores discussion from this week. What else have we got coming up?
So I'm very excited for the anniversary 4K restoration of Martin Scorsese's masterpiece Raging Bull, which a couple of friends of mine haven't seen ever. So we're going to make sure I drag them along to see that. I haven't seen it since I think about 2013, 2014. So I'm super gassed to see it again and just see, I'm sure, so many more filmmaking Easter eggs in it and gems of the art form. We have the Polite Society, a sort of almost kind of heist thriller romantic comedy, sort of indie Hindi focused, or Bend It Like Beckham tone wise almost. It's wild sort of comedy. It feels so sort of freewheeling in terms of genre. I'm just fascinated to see how it finally turns out, and it looks wildly entertaining as well. And then we're also going to talk about Beef, the new limited series on Netflix that has proved quite successful with the critical acclaim in the US, and features Glenn from The Walking Dead in it. So I'm kind of quite excited to see how that is. And I also want to.
It's the Ali Wong series, isn't it?
I believe so. Yes. And there's also
He's
a
fantastic.
new. And there's also a new island-based police procedural miniseries from the BBC called Blue Lights, I think it is, and I'm looking forward very much to that as well, considering it's being compared to sort of like a very gritty sort of Irish style Line of Duty, but more sort of boots on the ground, physical police work sort of thing. So yes, excited for next week's lineup.
Some streaming next week. I'm excited. I'm going to be able to keep up with you this time. The legs won't be sore trying to get to the cinema. So thank you as always for all of your wonderful reviews, Billy, and thank you for listening. So please like us on Instagram or on TikTok now. Please keep on sending in your suggestions when you see a post. We love hearing from everybody and seeing what you guys have to say. And also, if you are listening to the podcast on Apple, please leave us a review and share with your friends. We're really trying to grow our audience. We really enjoy doing this, and the more people that we can get to tune in, the better. So, yeah, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.